this topic is one of the ones where I said some of them will be longer, some of them will be shorter. This is one that's actually going to be shorter because it's actually an intro into section 3, but I did want to make mention of it. It's not something I want to avoid. It's called The Adversary and Jewish Evangelism. And I just want to say at the outset, first and foremost, that I am here tonight to give glory to the Lord. He's the one that has all authority over everyone. And we'll be discussing the adversary tonight. Interestingly enough, we had that earlier in our first session. And in my experience, I think it's very important that I would tell everybody that if you want to fear someone, you need to fear the Lord. You don't need to fear the adversary because his power is dependent and derived from God. That's all he's allowed to do. And I think it's interesting to note that the title for the adversary in Jewish evangelism, I'm going to move through this just so I can get to section 3, but I want you to note the very first verse that I ask you to look at on your notes is what? Genesis 3, 14 and 15. Now, I'm not going to teach the verse. I'm going to leave that to Arnold for his next session. But come on, that was pretty interesting how I didn't plan that. We didn't talk ahead of time. We asked him to finish at verse 13 in the previous session. All I'm saying is this particular verse is actually the background to Revelation chapter 12, and I'm not teaching Revelation chapter 12 either. So, well, what are you doing here? Why don't you just go back, Tom? And why are you here tonight? I'm using this strictly as trying to show the outworking, if you will, of the promise that God made in Genesis 3, 14 and 15, when the Lord said to the serpent, because you've done this, you're cursed above all cattle, above every beast of the field, upon their belly you will go, dust you'll eat all the days of your life. But he says, I will put enmity between thee and the woman, between thy seed and her seed, it shall bruise thy head, thou shalt bruise his heel. God said that there'll be an enmity between thee and the woman. In Revelation chapter 12, I'm just trying to show the concern that the adversary had over that initial promise that was made to him. And as Arnold pointed out to me at dinner, the adversary was the first one to hear the message of the hope of the Redeemer who would come. And in Revelation chapter 12, if you can turn there, if you will, in your Bible, as well as open to your notes, I noticed in the chapter three particular things in that chapter that the adversary attacks. And the first one will be mentioned in the intro, if you will, in Revelation chapter 12, verses 1 and 2, that there appears a great wonder, a great sign in heaven. And it's a woman who's clothed with the sun, and the moon under her feet, and upon her head are a crown of 12 stars. She, being with child, cried, travailing in birth, and pain to be delivered. The woman is very easily to be identified from Genesis 37, 9 to 10, the dream that Joseph had. It says in Genesis 37, 9 to 10, that he dreamed yet another dream and told it to his brethren, and said, Behold, I've dreamed a dream more, and behold, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars made obeisance to me. And he told it to his father and to his brethren, and his father rebuked him and said unto him, What is this dream that thou hast dreamed? Shall I and thy mother and thy brethren indeed come to bow down ourselves to thee to the earth? So in recognizing who this is speaking of, the woman in this dream is going to be pictured with a sun and a moon and a stars. The sun, obviously from his father, he recognized that, Joseph's father recognized that he was the picture of the sun in the dream, and that Rachel would be the woman, the wife, if you will, but also the mother of Joseph. And then the 11 stars would bow down to him, and he makes the 12th star because he's the 12th tribe of Israel. And so the woman in the dream would be Israel, which comes forth from the promise of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that particular Genesis 37, 9, and 10, the 12 tribes would be from the nation of Israel. But whenever I see the words sun, moon, and stars, I always can't help but think of the promise. The woman is arrayed, and some translations use the word clothed, and in some sense, Israel is protected by those things as well. Because as we found out from Jeremiah 31, 35, and 36, that the Lord made a promise that as long as the sun and the moon and the stars remain, the seed of Israel will remain a nation before me forever, in spite of what the adversary is going to try and do. But we do recognize that the adversary, the dragon, is pictured in verses 3 and 4 in Revelation 12. It says, "There appeared another wonder in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 crowns upon his head. And his tail drew the third part of the stars of heaven, and did cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman, which was ready to be delivered, to devour her child as soon as it was born." Historically, this is very easy to figure out as well. This is talking about the time just prior to the birth of Messiah, and then taking you right up into his ascension. When we look at the rest of the verses that follow. What this is actually picturing is the great red dragon at a time during what will be seen is the tribulation period, and in particular the last 3.5 years, or the Great Tribulation, when the dragon is going to do this. We recognize that his tail drew a third part of the stars of heaven. That's talking about what he's going to do in trying to devour the child as soon as it was born. Because that's what it says in the verse, "And so the adversary drew 1/3 of the stars." That's how many of the angels he was permitted by God to be able to use in trying to attack the woman as soon as she gives birth. And that actually gets fulfilled, obviously, in Matthew chapter 2, verses 16 and 18, when the adversary through, of course, Herod was going to try was going to kill all the children at his birth, and it was unsuccessful in doing so. This will, by the way, so the first thing that the adversary tries to do is to devour Messiah, to kill him at his birth, to not allow him to do it at the proper time when it should be done. But this is not the first time that the adversary has been involved in human history. And as a matter of fact, in trying to fulfill the promise that was made that there would be an enmity between he and the woman, he wasn't looking forward to a seed coming forth. And we even find that in the study in the book of Genesis later in chapter 6. And I'm not going to steal someone else's thunder. He's going to be able to share that with you. I'm only highlighting and mentioning it for this reason, that even before this, the adversary wasn't quiet in the Old Testament, trying to keep Messiah from coming. One of the things he did was a group of his fallen angels leave their first estate. They come down, and they're going to have relations with the daughters of men. The offspring of that, they're referred to as the Nephilim. They're the offspring, and those particular ones are going to be the reason for the flood taking place, so that God won't allow a seed line to be destroyed just because there's the intermarriage of angels and men. And so as a result, God's going to pick one man, and his name is Noah. And that's why even in Noah it found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Not only that, but it says that he was a just man and perfect in all his generations. There was no intermarriage between angels and men in the line of Noah. And so that even the word Tamim is used as being a phrase that describes without physical distortion. He was perfect in all his generations, and that word perfect is physically without distortion. And that will also support 2 passages in the New Testament, and I'm sure Arnold will cover them thoroughly with you when he gets to Genesis 6, both 2 Peter 2 and Jude verses 6 and 7, which tell us that those angels are actually kept in a special place until the day of the judgment of the great white throne, and they end up eventually in the lake of fire. Those particular angels don't even have access to this earth. In the next section, and this is why I'm using this simply as an introduction to section 3. And the first thing the adversary attempted to do was to devour the child as soon as it was born. But the second attack is going to be one that brings forth a persecution upon the woman which brought forth Jesus. In Revelation 12, 5 and 6, she brought forth a male child who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up unto God and to his throne. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared of God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days. The first verse, in verse 5, we recognize that completes the ascension when she brought forth a man-child to rule all nations, and he was caught up unto God and unto his throne. And then we jump in time quite a bit. We go from the birth of Jesus to the second coming, because in verse 6, the woman flees into the wilderness, and she's going to have a place prepared by God. And for those who've done their study of eschatology, recognize that that's talking about a special place called Petra, where God's going to protect her for a period of 3.5 years, or 1,260 days. And when the dragon, and verses 7 through 13, this dragon's second attack is going to be in verses 12 and 13, if you'll just jump down there for a moment. Therefore rejoice, you heavens, and you that dwell in him. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and the sea, for the devil is come down unto you, having great wrath, because he knoweth that he has but a short time. Because there was war in heaven in verses 7 through 13. Michael and the dragon fought, and he's cast out of heaven for good. He's going to be cast down to the earth. And they say, salvation's come for us, but woe to those who are in the earth, simply because the kingdom of God and the power of his Christ and the accuser of our brethren is cast down, which accused them before our God day and night. And they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, and loved not their lives to death. Rejoice, you heavens, you that dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and the sea, for the devil is come down unto you, having great wrath, because he knows he has a short time. And when the dragon saw that he was cast to the earth, that's in the future, in the tribulation, he persecuted the woman which brought forth a man-child. So the first attack was upon trying to get Jesus at his birth. The second attack is going to be to persecute the woman which brought forth Jesus. And then the dragon's third attack is going to be upon the remnant of the woman's seed in Revelation 12, 14 and 17. To the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle, reinforcing what was said earlier in verse 6. The woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness, into her place where she's nourished for a time, times and a half a time. That's 3.5 years, Chaldean, for the face of the serpent. The serpent cast out of his mouth waters of flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away of the flood. And the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened her mouth and swallowed up the flood which the dragon cast out of his mouth. And verse 17 says, the dragon was angry with the woman, and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of God, and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. So there's 3 things, and just in reading that, in a cursory reading, even if you're not trying to find out all the eschatology involved in that, you have to just ask yourself, there's 3 things the adversary's attacking. Why? First, he wants to destroy the Messiah, simply because that's the one who's going to be the seed. Secondly, he's going to when that doesn't work, he's going to attack the woman, the nation of Israel, which brought forth Jesus. And the third attack is going to be upon the remnant, the Jewish believers. Why is he so concerned about that? Well, a couple things happen in the course of history. In Matthew chapter 23, we sang about that just earlier. The Lord, weeping over Jerusalem, pronounced the judgment upon it at Matthew 23, 37 through 39. And he said, O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, thou that killest the prophets and stonest them which are sent unto thee, how often would I have gathered thy children together, even as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, and you would not. Behold, your house is left unto you desolate, for I say unto you, you will not see me until you say, henceforth, until you say what? Baruch haba b'shem Adonai. Blessed is he that cometh in the name of the Lord. I think the adversary knows about that scripture. I think he knows the scripture because he actually tried to use it to tempt Jesus, didn't he? And he's aware of the fact that the Lord can't come back until that happens to Jerusalem. And now we're in the book of Revelation. So in the year 90 or so, whenever John is writing this, we also find out in Revelation 20, verses 1 and 4, that he finds out that when the Lord comes back, he's going to go somewhere. In Revelation 21 and 4, 1 through 4, it says, I saw an angel come down from heaven having the key of the bottomless pit and a great chain in his hand. And he laid hold on the dragon, that old serpent which is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years, and cast him into the bottomless pit, and shut him up, and set a seal upon him, that he should not deceive the nations any more, till the 1,000 years should be fulfilled. And after that he must be loosed a little season. He recognizes that when the Lord comes back, he's going to be put in the bottomless pit for 1,000 years. Just put yourself in his shoes. Would you be looking forward to that? Well, from this text, I get the idea that the adversary must believe in a literal millennium. I think he believes in a premillennial return of the Lord. And what we find is that when that happens, he's going to be placed in the bottomless pit. The bottom line to all of this in section 10 is is this. The devil has a personal interest in Jewish people not looking with favor toward Jesus. Because if they ever all at once say, Baruch haba b'shem Adonai, the Lord can come back and he goes to the bottomless pit. That's where he ends up when they say that. That prophecy, by the way, will be fulfilled, I believe, as we read about that in Psalm 118, when all the nations of the earth are gathered against them to do battle, as it's also recorded in Zechariah 12 and Zechariah 14. Now, even if he knows that he can't stop the Lord's return, he certainly has been busy trying to prolong it as long as he can. And all I'm going to say is this. We jumped from the first coming with him trying to devour the Messiah. We go to the second coming, and he's trying to destroy the remnant of the seed as well as persecute the woman. But I don't think he's been taking a vacation the past 2,000 years. I think he's been working just like in the Old Testament he was working. Before it even comes to the time that we record this in Revelation 12 about when Messiah was to arrive the first time. I believe that he's been very interested in making sure that Jewish people don't look with favor toward Jesus, because he's very selfish and he has a personal interest in not wanting to go to the lake of fire eventually, but he doesn't want to go to the bottomless pit for 1,000 years. So even if he knows he can't stop the Lord's return, he's certainly been busy trying to prolong it as long as he can. I'll just ask you, have there been any genocidal attacks in the last 2,000 years upon the Jewish people, upon the woman? I think the answer is obvious. He's even used Christianity as the weapon via anti-Semitic beliefs, which developed into actual persecution, both physical and spiritual. I guess if you use Christianity as a weapon, well, first of all, dead Jews tell no tales. But when you use Christianity as the weapon, you will also hate the religion that's bringing forth the persecution. By the way, what do you think the devil thinks about Jewish evangelism and Jewish missionary activity? You got it. Ding! Yes, it's not good at all. As a matter of fact, you need to be praying at all times for the staff members at REL. You have to be concerned because he's going to be concerned, because you can have an impact on other people. I can tell you from my experience with Chosen People Ministries in Philadelphia, of the 4 people that I was on staff with in Philadelphia, 2 of them are no longer in the ministry. One of them just decided first to just go into pastorate because he didn't think he was using his gifts well, but now he's not even attending church anywhere. Another man who was serving the Lord in Philadelphia had to be dismissed because of sexual immorality and involved with a prostitute. You don't think the adversary is concerned about what we're doing? I would also ask that you pray for me as I share the good news of the gospel with my friends in Philadelphia, particularly the Russian Jewish people that I minister to in Philadelphia all the time. God is very much over all this. God's concerned about this, but it's a very serious issue that you're entering into when you're entering into Jewish evangelism. So I wanted to serve that as an introduction to section 3. So would you please open to that page as well. These sessions like tonight and tomorrow are groundwork for what I really want to do in getting into the work of Jewish evangelism and the joy of it. But we have to discuss this because of the impact that this has had upon the Jewish community. A well-known man involved in Jewish missions wrote a paper, and I read that paper, and it was very foremost and direct. The two things the Jewish people, the two greatest reasons why Jewish people are not looking forward to believing in Jesus and why it's so difficult in sharing the good news of the gospel is for that very reason that you would already expect. One of them is that, they think they're going to lose their Jewishness, that they're not going to be a Jew anymore. And we discussed that last night, that believing in Jesus is a very Jewish thing to do. You don't stop being Jewish, because being Jewish is something that takes place by birth. But the second reason is because of all the persecution that has come in the name of Jesus Christ in Christianity. That has the greatest impact on it. And I could have just done that. I could have just taken a brush and gone, okay, persecution is the reason why. I don't want to discuss it anymore. Now let's get on to the other things that talk about evangelism. But I don't think that's worthy of the opportunity to tell you all that takes place in the persecution that has an effect on the Jewish community and how it has had an effect to this day, even if we go out Saturday with Jonathan. The reasons for all that, the animosity, is the result of anti-Semitism and the Christian church. So in section 3, I want to give you a chronological list of those things if you have them there. The first one is Justin Martyr in 135. He accused the Jews of inciting Romans to kill Christians after they, the Jews, killed God. As far as we know, that's the very first time the Jewish people were accused of it, and the term God murderers was first introduced. Later, Christ killers developed from that, and that's recorded in the Nicene Fathers, Volume 1, Chapter 16 and 5. In his dialogue with Trypho, between 138 and 161 AD, somewhere in that time, it says he wrote the following: "The custom of circumcising the flesh, handed down from Abraham, was given to you as a distinguishing mark, to set you off from other nations and from us Christians. The purpose of this was that you and only you might suffer the afflictions that are now justly yours, that only your land be desolated, and your cities ruined by fire, that the fruits of your land be eaten by strangers before your very eyes, that not one of you be permitted to enter the city of Jerusalem." What started to happen as the church started to grow and more Gentiles came in, they started for some reason, maybe with the help of the adversary, to have anti-Semitic beliefs. They started to hate the Jewish people. It developed in such a way that a controversy started to arise. There was a group of Christians that wanted to continue to celebrate Pascha, and that was the celebration of the Lord's Supper on the Nisan, the 14th day of the month of Nisan. Now, I call that the Easter controversy simply because it's a lot easier than saying the Quartodeciman controversy. That's Quartodeciman is the 14th of Nisan. And what started to happen is that the churches, some of them wanted to continue to celebrate that, but some of them, they didn't want to be associated anything to do with the Jewish community. We want to move it to a different date. We want to move it to a different Sunday. And if you wanted a very full and wonderful explanation of it, there was a whole article on just that in Ariel's magazine. And I think it was the winter-spring of 2015. The author of that was Chris Eisbrenner, who's here with us tonight. And I'm also able to tell you that Chris spent 3 years with me in Philadelphia, living with us at our mission. And in many ways, he credits me for starting to develop him in his work with Jewish missions. But in this particular story, he talks about the complete history. If you can get a copy of the article, please do so. And the controversy was so much got to a place where it no longer was just going to be, well, some of us were going to celebrate it on a different day. Some of us are going to celebrate it on the 14th of Nisan. The fourth and final phase of this whole controversy gets to a place in the 4th century when a Roman Theodosius reacted even some 60 years after the decree of Constantine at the Council of Nicaea. Now, Constantine is an interesting character in history because in around 325 or so, he declared a peace between the Roman government and Christianity. They're no longer going to try and kill Christians. As a matter of fact, now the Roman emperor declares Christianity the religion of Rome. And when the emperor does that, well, everybody's going to start joining Christianity. Now all of a sudden we have an influx of pagans that are part of the definition of Christianity. And so they started looking for different ways to celebrate things, and we're going to look at it in just a second. But in Constantine, he made an actual statement, and it's hard for me at times even to read it, but it's Constantine's accusation simply was that the Jewish people, they did not want to celebrate it any longer. They did not want to celebrate Pascha at the date where we celebrated it before. As a matter of fact, he's going to make it a very harsh statement in that title of it is Another Letter of Constantine. And it says, when the question arose concerning the most holy day of Easter, it was decreed by common consent to be expedient that this festival should be celebrated on the same day by all in every place. We're not going to have it, some churches celebrating on the 14th of Nisan, some on a different Sunday. That this festival should be celebrated on the same day by all, and truly, in the first place, it seemed to everyone a most unworthy thing that we should follow the custom of the Jews in the celebration of this most holy solemnity. The polluted wretches, referring to the Jews, having stained their hands with a nefarious crime, are justly blinded in their minds. Let us then have nothing in common with this most hostile rabble of Jews. Let us withdraw ourselves, my honored brethren, from that most odious fellowship. It was Roman Emperor Theodosius that also then went one step further. And by the end of the 4th century, he said with an edict that putting violators of celebrating it on the 14th of Nisan from now on would be under penalty of death, calling them heretics. With this great influx of Gentiles coming into the church, many of them pagan, I quote from Dr. Rennie Showers. And in his book, he says the following: many Christians began to panic over the mass pagan conversions and attitudes. They feared that unless the church was made relevant to the pagans, they would never be reached for Christ. In their zeal to make the church relevant, these Christians attempted to Christianize the pagan practices and then adopt them into the church. They substituted images of the apostles and martyrs for the images of gods and goddesses, national heroes. The veneration of Mary as Queen of Heaven replaced the veneration of the pagan queen. Communion was changed from a memorial to a sacrifice. Elders were transformed from teachers into priests, and heathen festivals were incorporated as special church days. I'm sure most of you know that statement about Easter. You probably already know, many of you, the history of Easter and the word of it. They wanted to celebrate and make the pagans happy, and Easter comes from the Assyrian goddess Ishtar, or Ashtarte, the Assyrian goddess of fertility, which is probably why you have bunnies connected with Easter, because they're fertile, and eggs because there's something fertilized. And that's the day now that it's celebrated. And you know, when they celebrated Ishtar's celebration, it was on the first Sunday following the first full moon after the spring equinox. That's the day of Easter, or Ishtar. There's another wonderful festival that's called Saturnalia. I'm going to get my resource on that one. Saturnalia was a Roman festival that celebrated between December 19th and the 24th to the great god Saturn. And during that festival, leading up to December 25th, everyone fested and rejoiced. All work was suspended. The houses were decorated with laurels and evergreens. Presents were given by parents, children, one and all. This can no doubt be the connection to why Christmas was chosen December 25th, because, hey, look, the pagans are used to celebrating it on that day anyway. Same thing with Easter. Well, we're used to celebrating it. Let's make the pagans comfortable, and so that's how December 25th was actually picked. I say all this in retrospect. I say all this because I can still remember the standing before the guy who was the chairman of my ordination council when I met with him in his church. And I said to him, I think it'd be wonderful, because they approved me as an ordained minister. And I said to him, well, how about if I come and present a Messiah in the Passover presentation? I think the church would really like to see the background to the Lord's Supper. And he said to me, wouldn't that be like going back under the law? And he said that to me while they were decorating a Christmas tree right behind him. I kid you not. Well, following the controversy in the Council of Nicaea, it seemed that maybe this was also the adversary's way of changing things, because he wasn't very successful in squashing the growth of the believers by killing them. And I think he tried to join them, like a serpent, poisoning it from within. You see, in the early church, Christianity's definition included Jewish things. Now, all of a sudden, we want to move Jesus and Jewish things as far apart as possible. Chrysostom in 344-407 said the festivals of the pitiful and miserable Jews, in his homily in 1:15, the festivals of the pitiful and miserable Jews are soon as to march upon us one after another and in quick succession. The Feast of Trumpets, the Tabernacles, and fasts. If then the Jews fail to know, in homily 1, section 3, if the Jews fail to know the Father, if they crucified the Son, if they thrust off the help of the Spirit, who should not make bold to declare plainly that the synagogue is a dwelling place of demons? God is not worshipped there. Heaven forbid. From now on, it remains a place of idolatry. Cyril, the patriarch of Alexandria in 415, Schaff's History of the Christian Church records this. In the year 415, he fell upon the synagogues of very numerous Jews with armed force, because under provocation of his bitter injustice. They had been guilty of trifling tumult. He put some to death and drove out the rest and exposed their property to the excited multitude. Clovis, the chief of the Franks, he was interesting. He's going to be one that is going to make a bold proclamation to say, if I had been there when Jesus was crucified, I would have saved him. That shows the foolishness of what people believed in that period. What's the next session? Is it the Crusades? All right. Crusades in 1099. At Rouen, all Jews were unwilling to submit to baptism were put to death. At Worms, Jews were massacred and property divided. In 1099 in Jerusalem, all the Jews of the city were put into the great synagogue, and it was set on fire while the Crusaders sang hymns. With crosses on shields, Jewish people were told to believe in Jesus or die. Do you understand why we're moving along, that Jewish people are going to take a reactive method to Christianity? We're going to see that in our next session that we have. Richard the Lionhearted in 1189 expelled the Jews from England and confiscated their property. During the Middle Ages, Jews were charged with sorcery, blamed for the Black Plague and other disasters like the Lisbon earthquake. They were charged with the ritual murder of Christian children so that their blood could be used to make matzah. That's, by the way, those references I got from Chosen People's Ministries book on how to introduce your Jewish friends to the Messiah. In 1214, as we look at the Roman Catholic Church, there was a council called the Fourth Lateran Council. And one of their canons, in Canon 68, it says, Jews must wear dress that distinguishes them from Christians, and they cannot appear in public from Good Friday through Easter Sunday. Canon 69, Jews cannot hold public office and Christian officials cannot interact with Jews. And Canon 70, Jews who have been baptized should be restrained from returning to their former rite. I can only tell you this. The Roman Catholic Church has held Jewish people of all periods of all time responsible for the death of Yeshua. I heard this by a priest because that was my background and I grew up in Roman Catholicism. And a priest from the pulpit says, do you want to go to hell like the rest of the Jews? This teaching, by the way, was only recently nullified by the Roman Catholic Church. I'm not just picking out situations which are talking about the persecution of Jews. I'm talking about this being sanctioned by Christianity, at least the definition of what it was in the world. Thomas Aquinas in 1247 wrote, it would be perfectly licit to hold Jews because of their crucifying our Lord in perpetual servitude. The Synod of Breslau in 1267 decrees compulsory ghettos for the Jews in Breslau, Austria. The Spanish Inquisition in 1478. By Spain and Portugal were attempts by the state to church to legislate conformity. Jewish people were forced to convert to Catholicism or leave their homes and all their belongings during the Spanish Edict expulsion in 1492, many of the Jews of which came over here to America. In 1491, in the year prior, during the Inquisition, hundreds of thousands of Jews were burned at the stake for not accepting the Christian religion. Martin Luther, this is not just restricted to Roman Catholicism. Martin Luther, a great reformer, wrote a text called On Jews and Their Lies, translated by Martin Bertram on the Jews and Their Lies. It's available to be read in anywhere. He said several things that you just can't believe. This is from a man who believed in salvation by faith. What then shall we Christians do with this damned, rejected race of Jews? We cannot tolerate them if we do not wish to share in their lies, curses, and blasphemy. In this way, we cannot quench the inexhaustible fire of the divine rage nor convert the Jews. Let me give you my honest advice. And then he lists 7 things. First, their synagogue should be set on fire. Whatever does not burn up should be recovered or spread over the dirt that no one may ever be able to see a cinder or stone of it. And this ought to be done for the honor of God and of Christianity in order that God may see that we are Christians and that we have not wittingly tolerated or approved of such public lying, cursing, and blaspheming of His Son and His Christians. Secondly, their homes should likewise be broken down and destroyed. For they persecute the same things that they do in their synagogues. They perpetrate the same things that they do in their synagogues. For this reason, they ought to be put under one roof or in a stable, like gypsies, in order that they may realize that they are not masters in our land. Thirdly, and I'm just highlighting, it's much lengthier. They should be deprived of their prayer books and Talmuds in which such idolatry, lies, cursing, and blasphemy are taught. Fourthly, their rabbis must be forbidden under threat of death to teach any more. Fifthly, passport and traveling privileges should be abolished, absolutely forbidden to the Jews. If you princes and nobles do not close the road legally to such exploiters, then some troop ought to ride against them, for they will learn from this pamphlet what the Jews are and how to handle them, and that they ought not to be protected. You cannot protect them unless in the eyes of God you want to share all their abomination. I'm sorry that I have to read this, but if you don't know this, you're missing the reason why Jewish people have a hard time believing in Jesus. Sixthly, they ought to be stopped from usury. Seventhly, let the young and strong Jews and Jewesses be given the flail, the axe, the hoe, the spade, the distaff, and spindle, and let them earn their bread by the sweat of their noses. We ought to drive the rascally bones out of our system, therefore away with them. To sum up, dear princes and nobles who have Jews in your domains, if this advice of mine does not suit you, then find a better one, that you may all be free of this insufferable devilish burden, the Jews. When you lay your eyes on a Jew, you must say to yourself, alas, that mouth which I there behold has cursed and executed and maligned every Saturday my Lord Jesus Christ. I can't read anymore. The Dreyfus Affair in the 1890s. A Jewish captain named Alfred Dreyfus was accused of selling military secrets to the enemy. Without any proof, he was found guilty and sentenced to Devil's Island. During the trial, it was implied that Jews could not be trusted because they weren't Christians. Violence in other French towns resulted, the clergy often leading it. See, this is Christ's name being placed on this. And all I can see is the adversary smiling because of how the Jews are being treated. Violence in other French towns resulted, the clergy often leading it, with Jewish people beaten and murdered and property taken. Eventually, Dreyfus was proven innocent. And actually, it was French army officials who were involved in the treason, accusations, and the cover-up. One positive result of the Dreyfus Affair was this. There was an Austrian Jewish journalist. His name was Theodor Herzl. And he changed his view that we can't try and assimilate with the Gentiles, with Christians, but the best way to solve anti-Semitism instead, he wrote Der Judenstaat, supporting a Jewish homeland in Israel, starting the ball rolling for them returning to the land. The Russian pogroms. I only mentioned that circa 1902 through 1905, but it's actually started around 1881 and goes actually all through 1921. Pogroms were organized attacks. They were mob attacks of Jews who were killed, forced out of Russia, or forced to convert, organized by the state church, the state itself, and local clergymen. They say that the worst was in Kishinev in 1905, although my Russian Jewish friends that I minister to from the Ukraine say that the worst was in Babi Yar. Jewish men were beaten, women raped, and villages razed. Nazi Germany in 1930 to 1945, I don't need to tell you any more than that, but I will say this, that Martin Luther would have done it anyway without Martin Luther's writings. But he used his writings for the support of what he did, to support his anti-Semitism and genocide, and unfortunately, the church was silent. I ask you this simple question. If your ancestors were persecuted by any religious group, because I know many of you, like me, are Gentile believers too. If your ancestors were persecuted by a religious group, what would you think of that group? I say this in churches all the time because they ask me, why are Jewish people so resistant? I said, well, if your ancestors were persecuted by a religious group, you would hate that group. But more importantly, what if one of your family members became one of them? A term that started in around the 1st century is still being called that today. They would call them a meshumad, a traitor to their people. All I have to offer is this. The adversary has been very much busy in the last 2,000 years. He doesn't want to go to the bottomless pit. He's been doing all he can to make Jewish people and Jesus far apart. He doesn't want them to be looked with favor. Using Christianity as the weapon also accomplishes a person that they don't want to look towards Jesus. We have a big obstacle. We're trying to overcome all those years of history. And so even to this day, that feeling or that sentiment is passed down to the Jewish community that they can't be Jewish and believe in Jesus. But you have to understand where that originated from. And I'm sorry that I had to read all that. I'm not happy about it either. Nevertheless, I do believe that the Lord is in control and that the Jewish people have a great hope set before them, and that the adversary is not going to be able to stop the kingdom of heaven because the gates of hell will not prevail against it. I recognize God oversaw all this, and He allowed it, and so I have to believe it and understand that it's in God's plan that He permitted it. But He certainly gets even with all those people who persecute the Jewish people, according to the promise of Genesis 12. And I don't want to teach anything about that because I've already brought too much of Genesis in this because Arnold's teaching it. Nevertheless, I ask for your prayer for Jewish people. I ask for your prayer for the people who are involved in Jewish evangelism in any way, shape, or form, whether they're a volunteer, a part-time missionary, a full-time missionary, just you yourselves. Please pray for the Jewish people and please pray for those people who are going to share their faith with Him. With that, I want to call this an evening. If anybody has any questions, I guess we can open the floor at this time. So I don't know what else you could ask or add to that. Yes, Kelly?
During this time, was there like the remnant of Messianic believers? But were they all expected to go to Christianity or else? Or was there, like, where was the remnant, or where does it, or maybe we'll talk about it tomorrow night or in the future, but when does it?
In Romans chapter 11, it's very clear that there's always been a remnant according to grace. I can't say that about any people group in the rest of the world. So Jewish people are often are addressed in that way, but when I'm telling Gentile believers, I said, I don't believe that every person from England has always been saved, or there's always been someone from my background in that area, but the Jewish people have always had a remnant according to grace. Where they were meeting, and in any particular case, I'm not astute on all that, but I do know they were there. I don't believe that but by being forced to join into the Roman Catholic Church, that made them believers. I believe it's God's standard of what makes a person a believer, and that's by salvation is by grace through faith alone. Yes, sir.
The message of Christ was brought first to the Gentile by the Jewish people.
Amen.
My question is, the Jewish people were the one that brought Christianity to us Gentiles.
Yes, that I do agree.
Now, Christians turn against the Jewish people, saying they persecute or they killed Christ. I'm asking if this was one of the tricks of Satan so that the Jewish people will harden their heart from accepting their Messiah.
The adversary's always involved, I guarantee that, when Jewish people are not accepting the Messiah. He's the background to all of that, and so I don't think we need to say any more than that. He does not want Jewish people believing in Jesus, so any movement in that direction, he's behind. Yes, Richard.
Is it true that for a large part of Martin Luther's ministry that he befriended the Jewish people?
I think what I've read about Martin Luther is originally when he left Roman Catholicism, his thought was, oh, well, the Jewish people will follow right. And he didn't realize that the persecution has been going on for quite some time, and they weren't ready to embrace him just because he's going to start a new form of Christianity. So originally it was okay, but when they rejected what he believed, now we have what I read to you this evening. I believe that our time is up for this evening. Thank you for your kind attention. You've been a real encouragement to me just by staying awake. Yeah.